Okay, we're on part 4 of Era 5 study guide. So we're looking at question 22. Which group of people could vote post 1824? Basically, all white male citizens could actually vote who, they dropped that land requirement. So previously to this, you had to pretty much have land ownership in order to vote, and you had to be a white male citizen. John Quincy Adams is actually the guy who expands suffrage. So he expands voting rights, suffrage, to all white males. And after he does it, they vote for Andrew Jackson in the next election, the election of 1828. So even though he gives all white guys suffrage in the United States, they don't vote for him. They vote for the guy who seems more like them, the common man, the guy who had nothing growing up and kind of, pulls himself up. Even though, John Quincy Adams actually kind of comes from a nice family, but not a well-to-do family. They just don't see John Quincy Adams as them. Question 23 is, what does the word antebellum mean? So anytime you see that big fancy word antebellum, it just means before the war, before the Civil War. So here's the Civil War, here's how our country kind of divides up. Here are the Confederate states. Here are our border states. These are states that had slaves but stayed loyal to the United States, the Union, the North. And these are territories that will be involved but will not be states at the time. Question 24 is, how did Texas become a part of the United States? So, those Texans, they moved out here to this colony of Texas. They got permission from Mexico. They bring slaves with them. Mexico doesn't like that. And as time goes on, they fight for their independence and they win it. As time goes on, Mexico and Texas are having an issue. They have an issue about the border. Texas believes this is their border, the Rio Grande. Mexico's like, it's north of that. You guys are wrong. And we will eventually annex Texas because they asked to be annexed. They asked to be added. Because when we add them, whatever problems they have with Mexico are no longer just Texas's problems, but they're United States problems with Mexico. And that's how we get the Mexican-American War or the Mexican War. Question 25 is, why is President Polk considered Manifest Destiny president? When you look at this guy, he actually does a lot for expanding the United States. He annexes Texas, and we have the big question of, if we annex Texas, you're going to get another slave state. But he does it anyway. He fights the Mexican-American War. He gives the United States the Southwest Territory, so we get all this Southwest stuff, the Mexican cession from it. He bullies Britain into giving us the Northwest Territory, or the Oregon Territory. So basically this guy really does do a lot, and when you're looking at puzzle pieces, he kind of fills in the puzzle pieces of the continental 48 states. The next question is 26, and this one's a lot because it's got a lot of treaties. So you have to identify what the U.S. received, acquired in each of the following. So in the Treaty of Paris, 1783, basically America gets its independence from Britain. And we get the original 13 colonies. It's ours now. And they're no longer colonies, they're going to be states. But we get everything to the Mississippi River. And this is all ours. We don't get the Mississippi River, but we get, we can touch it. Okay? We can look at it. It looks pretty. We'd like to have it. We'll get that later. Treaty of Greenville is going to give the United States the Ohio River Valley. And we basically force the American Indians into giving this to us. We fight them. And we get this area right here. The Treaty of Ghent is going to end the War of 1812, and we don't gain anything, we don't lose anything, we just kind of get respect, and nobody messes with us. So when we issue the Monroe Doctrine years later, people are like, ooh, those Americans, they're serious, they went against Britain twice. In the Louisiana Purchase, the United States, under President Jefferson, we go ahead and we buy this area. It instantly doubles the size of the United States. And remember, Jefferson does it because if you actually expand this area, it's going to be farmland. That's what he wants. He wants an agrarian, agricultural land for the country. And it's self-defense. France currently owns it. Buy them out. Same thing we do down here with Florida. So the Adams-Honest Treaty, we buy Florida out of the United States. So or at least out of this part of the area of the American continent. So buy them out. We get Florida. Spain's away from us. France is away from us. You're going to see us doing this a lot. These European countries, like France and Spain, are actual threats to us. So buy them, and then you don't have to worry about them ever anymore. The next treaty set that we look at is like the annexation of Texas. So we add Texas. Here's the Texas annexation, so we actually get a good deal. But eventually it leads us to war with Mexico because it's the border dispute. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, this is the treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. And so in this treaty, even though it doesn't take us long to actually fight the Mexican-American War, we actually get all of this. Pretty much everything north of the Rio Grande River, except this little part down here. So we kind of get, like if you look at it, I like this map because it kind of shows you where the modern day states are that actually came from Mexico. And the Gadsden Purchase the United States buys the rest of Arizona and New Mexico. See the little bit right here that we didn't get, we pretty much buy that from Mexico, and it's pretty cheap, okay? At 5440 our fight, this refers to this territory up here, and it just refers to the map lines. So this is just talking about our little map lines like we talked about with Missouri, and we talked about, our little map lines there on slavery. So same thing here, it's just going to be a campaign slogan. And so we get the 5440 our fight because it's telling Britain, either you give us this land or we go to war. And Britain's like, calm down, just take it. Question 27 is, what was the major topic during the election of 1844? The Oregon Territory and its acquisition of Texas. So when you look at this, like election, for electoral, it's not necessarily close, but when you look at popular vote, it actually is kind of close. But Polk wins it, and he wins because he is the manifest destiny president. Look at Henry Clay. He's going again for the presidency. It's kind of a reoccurring trend for him. All right, question 28. Who won the election of 1824, and how did the loser react to the results? So John Quincy Adams wins, and we looked at this earlier in the other video. But Jackson claims a corrupt bargain's been made. Because if you look, to him, the United States got cheated. And they got cheated because he won, in his opinion, the electoral vote and the people's vote. But he doesn't win a majority. And so whenever you don't win a majority, the Speaker of the House or the House of Representatives gets to decide. Why the House? It's per that in the Constitution. The House, every 2 years, that's their term, so they could get voted in and out. They're closest to the people. They have the power of the purse. They do your tax revenue stuff. So we choose the House to actually have this prestigious role. And so when they looked at the two people, they decided the son of a president who had foreign policy matters and domestic matters under his belt would be the better presidential term. He'd be the better presidential candidate. So they picked John Quincy Adams over a guy who, started some issues with Florida, with the Seminoles. He really started the issues with Spain. And a guy who was a governor of Tennessee. So if you look at this next one, okay, in 1825, what you're looking at is the vote, okay? So when they actually determine who's going to be the president, John Quincy Adams still only comes out with 54% of the actual vote, and Jackson is going to have 29%. And then you got Crawford, this other guy who, gets forgotten in history. He gets 17%. So in this one, you see that they really did go ahead and they pulled out the votes for John Quincy Adams. And so Jackson claims a corrupt bargain's been made, that you've cheated the American people of their true president. Question 29, what does corrupt bargain refer to? This. Jackson referred to the election as corrupt. And it's because once John Quincy Adams does get to be the president, he actually takes Henry Clay and he promotes him up. He actually becomes Secretary of State. So here is a guy who goes from Speaker of the House to Secretary of State. Both are really prestigious positions. Both are very powerful positions. Speaker of the House is second to the president. You got your president. If anything happens to the president, the vice president will assume the presidency. And if something has happened to the president and the vice president, the Speaker of the House gets the job. But as Secretary of State, he gets to actually do a lot of foreign diplomacy stuff. And so that's going to give him some more experience. So when Jackson looked at this, he said, oh, I see what you guys did. You cheated me of the presidency. This guy got a job promotion, and I'm just stuck in Tennessee. You cheated the American people. That's really what he kind of claims. Question 30 is court cases and what was the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in each of the cases. Marbury versus Madison established judicial review. So we looked at that when we looked at the previous area. But this is SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, giving themselves more power. So in the ruling, they actually expand their own power. Judicial review is not original to the Constitution. It is actually an expansion of it. In Gibbons versus Ogden, remember New Jersey and New York are arguing over the river, the Hudson area, okay? And they believe, one of them believes that they should have exclusive rights, and the federal government says, you both have to share it. Like children, they're arguing over it. And so only the federal government can regulate interstate and international trade. Because it's crossing state lines, the government's got to regulate that. Because if you look at states, they always have arguments and complaints. So you have to have a parent figure, the federal government, regulating that. So that's what the government actually reasserts in Gibbons versus Ogden. And remember, in these early court cases, you talk about Chief Justice John Marshall ruling. And he pretty much always rules in favor of the federal government gaining more power because he is a federalist. McCulloch versus Maryland. Maryland, a southern state, it tries to actually tax the national bank. So the national bank is situated in Maryland, or at least that's what they think. And so they try and tax the bank. This is a part of like Southerners trying to destroy the bank. But what the ruling is states cannot tax a federal institution. And this federal government institution, the national bank, even though it might be in the state of Maryland, because it's federal property, it's not. So you can't actually tax a United States government institution. Federal government is supreme over states. And this is kind of the supremacy stuff. So this is why, like, even though North Carolina has Fort Bragg, when you enter Fort Bragg, you are technically leaving North Carolina. When you enter Fort Bragg, you are entering a federal military base, and you are subject to all the rules and things that go on there. So when you shop at the commissary, their equivalent of a grocery store, you don't pay a North Carolina sales tax. You just pay something that the federal government has on it, okay? That's a federal government-run business. But the KFC on base, you pay a state tax to, because that's a industry. That's not a government-run business. Same thing with the post office. You don't pay a sales tax there. That's a federal business. So even though states might want to tax a federal institution, they're not allowed to. Westchester versus Georgia. This one is dealing with the American Indians, and so the American Indians sue, and they sue because they would go ahead and they want to stay on their land. Georgia is trying to force them off the land. They want the land because when you look at the picture, you look at the Indian Removal Act, the land in Georgia is actually pretty good farmland, and so the poor farmers over here in Georgia want more land, and Georgia's trying to accommodate them and give them this land. The only problem is, American Indians live on it. So they try and force the American Indians off, and they sue. And the Supreme Court says, no, Georgia, you're actually not allowed to touch, negotiate, deal with the American Indians. The American Indians are basically a foreign country. They're a foreign nation. They have their own government. They have their own rules. So if they're a foreign government, the only people who can deal with them is the United States government. So Georgia backed down. You're not allowed to deal with them. Only the federal government will deal with them. The only issue with this is that the Supreme Court does issue this, but all they do is interpret the law. They don't enforce the law. And President Jackson is the president during this time, and he is no friend to the American Indians. And he basically tells the Supreme Court, I'd like to see you enforce your ruling, and he never enforces it.